Hi everyone, welcome back to Coding 101, and in this video we're going to be talking about functions. So functions are just ways in which you can abstract your code down so you can reuse it again and again. So let's give you an example. I'm going to go all the way back to our first program that we created, which is the Hello World program. It's a very simple program. We just print the word Hello World, and this time I'm going to do it multiple times. I'm gonna run this, and we just printed hello world multiple times. So this is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it, a better way of doing it, is to create a function. So how do we do that? We basically type the keyword def, and we need to give the function a name. So that's the function name there, and we follow it by a parenthesis and a colon, and the next line we basically put in what we want to execute. And as you can see, just like the loops and the if statements, it requires an indentation there. So we've just created our first function here, and the next thing we want to do is we want to execute this function here. So the way to do it is we type in the function name that we created, and then we put in a parenthesis, and if we run this code, it will print hello world there. So basically we just created our first function and we've executed it, and this is actually a very simple function where it just has one line of code. But if you imagine if you're writing a particular script or a program where you have like lines of code or block of code where you need to run it multiple times, and instead of writing that sequence of code multiple times, you can just create a function and put in the lines of code, and then you can actually call that function there multiple times. It will actually reduce the lines of code that you have in your script. So that is a function. And so let's extend this function, is this function's ability, and I'm going to rename this function hello. So maybe you don't want to say hello to the world, you want to say hello to someone else. So let's just create a function called hello, and I'm going to introduce something called an argument. So in this parentheses, I'm just going to put a sort of identifier or variable. I'm going to call it name, and then I'm going to change the function, how it executes. I'm going to say hello, and I'm going to add name, and I'm going to call this new function hello. I'm going to run this, and as you can see, it actually spits out an error here. It says it's missing one required positional argument. That's because we've created a new function and we've introduced an argument, and this function needs a value for that argument. So you need to give a value, and the way you will need to do it is when you're calling it in the parentheses, you need to provide the value. So if this function you want to say hello to Mary, you can just put in hello Mary, and you run this function and it says hello Mary. So basically now you've created a function that's a little bit more flexible than the previous one. You can actually change what the output is based on the input. So you can say hello to John, and you can say hello to George. And if you run this code here, you will get different outputs based on the inputs you've put in here. So that's basically an argument, and this function only takes a single argument, but you can actually add multiple arguments to a function. So I'm going to create in another function and call it full name, and this time I'm going to put multiple arguments here. And if you want to put multiple arguments, they need to be separated by a comma. I'm going to put first name and then last name colon, and I'm going to print first name. I'm going to add a space, and then I'm going to add the last name, and then I am going to call it. I'm going to call full name, and I'm just going to put my name here. Let's just put my name, and I'm going to run it. and it prints out my name here. So basically we've created a second function with multiple arguments, and as you can see here that the first argument here corresponds to the first value and the second argument corresponds to the next value here. So if we swap the values, you will obviously swap the names here. So you will actually swap the values here that is outputted because the position matters here. So this can provide, and I mean, if you have like two arguments, there might not be an issue of remembering where the positions are. But if you have like a function with 10 arguments, that might actually become more difficult. So you want a way to put in your arguments without caring about the positions, and the way you want to do it is you want to provide what we call keyword arguments. So instead of just putting in the values here, you can put in last name and then put an equal sign to the value, and then next argument you can put first name and then equals to that value there. And if you run this, it will actually execute the way you want, because now you provided the argument name and you've actually specified what argument corresponds to what value here. So you can actually ignore the position and it will execute the way it the way you want. So that's basically what a keyword argument is. There's another way to define a function. So I'm going to go back to the first function we've created. We've created a function called hello with a argument name, and then we want to basically extend this function hello, and instead of just saying hello to one person, maybe you want to say hello to multiple people. So what we can do is we can create something called an arbitrary argument, and to do that we have to put in an argument starting with a star, and then instead of name I'm going to say people. I'm going to call the argument people, and in the code block here I'm going to put a for loop, and I say for person in people, and then I'm going to print out hello. Instead of name I'm going to say person. So if you run this code again, so it still gives you hello Mary, hello John, hello George. So if you put in a single input, it still works, but now it actually this function is actually able to put in multiple arguments. So if you want to say hello John and then Mary and then George, you can actually do that too with this arbitrary argument. So if you run this code, it says hello John, Mary, George. What it does is it takes the input, basically it provides the input as a tuple, and you can loop through that and you can execute the whatever on each of the inputs here the same way here. So that's where you can actually extend the functionality using what we call an arbitrary argument. So we've actually gone through quite a bit about functions. We've basically shown you how to create a function, how to execute a function, and we've introduced various different ways to define arguments. We've created single arguments, multiple arguments, ways in which we can put in keyword arguments, and lastly we will use arbitrary arguments. So I'm gonna end this video here. We've not actually covered everything we need to cover on functions. I'm going to do it in the next video. So I'm going to end this video here, and I'll see you guys in the next video where we'll continue talking about functions. So I'll see you then, and have a nice day. Goodbye.